Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining this morning. Hi everyone. Thank you so much. Hi. I'm waiting for my guest, guys. Miss Maeza, Meaza Gebremedhin. She will teach us how to say her name correctly when she comes. Hi, thank you so much for joining in. Today we're trying to talk again about what is happening in Ethiopia. A lot has been going on, and I'm hoping that you guys will join in the conversation so that we can all make sense of it. How is your weekend so far? While I'm waiting on her, I would take people if there's anybody that wants to come on the show. There's a lot happening right now, actually. It's not just with Ethiopia, there's so much happening um, with, oh, she's here. There's a lot happening in Sierra Leone. There's a lot happening in Nigeria as we prepare for election. Kenyans in the house. Are there any Kenyans in the house, by the way? Hello, how are you? Good
Hi, I'm good.
morning.
How are you? Good
Thanks for
morning.
joining us. Could you please write your name in English just so that people that are not from Ethiopia can address you by your name if they're trying to ask you a question? There's a lot happening all over Africa, actually. In Sierra Leone, you guys are aware what's been happening there with the protest and how protesters were being killed. 21 protesters killed as of yesterday. I don't know what the death toll is right now. About 6 security officers killed. Kenyans, we're still waiting to know who's winning this election. It's been between Ruto and Raila Odinga, so it's been a very tight race. Nigerians, it's everyday drama that has been happening in Nigeria, and so we're trying to be on top of all these stories. But today we want to focus on Ethiopia. I have talked about Ethiopia in the past, and by the way, before I introduce my guest, we did a live show on Ethiopia in June. And at the time, I had a guest by the name of Miss Hamela Aregawi, and she talked to us about what's been happening in Ethiopia. And on that day, I tried so hard to have an opposing view as well. Actually, before that day, but I was hoping that on that day we would have an opposing view, but I never heard back from a number of people that I had contacted. Hi, greetings to you guys. I see your comments. Thank you so much. But believe it or not, it was that same day that Miss Miaza said that she would like to come on the show to give an opposing view. Now, Miss Miaza will tell you that her and I have been going back and forth since June 4th, if I remember correctly, mainly because she's been wanting to come on the show since then. And I said no, because I want opposing view, just like I had wanted when I had Miss Hamela, but then it didn't happen. So because I am not from Ethiopia, it's really hard trying to make sense of everything that is happening. And also because I have never been to Ethiopia, which is terrible. As an African, I should, visit as many African countries as possible. Ethiopia definitely is one of my dream destinations, one of the countries that I'm hoping to visit someday. So because I am not from Ethiopia and I'm trying to make sense of what's happening in Ethiopia, not just me, everybody that watches my show, that's why I wanted to have both sides in the room when we talk about what is happening in Ethiopia. Please keep in mind, Miss Miaza, that my audience, they are from different African countries, and we are all really interested in what is happening in Ethiopia, mainly because we believe that as Africans, we are all one. Um, we have more in common than our differences. And so if something is happening in Ethiopia, it's affecting us as well. Not to talk about the fact that Ethiopia is the second most populated African country It's a big country. So whatever is happening in Ethiopia is affecting us all. So today I'm hoping that you will shed light on the opposing view. We're trying to understand what is happening. And I have told her that, because I am not from Ethiopia, I would be so grateful to go through the comments to have people comment on what she says and also send in their questions. I do have some questions for you as well, but I like to start out just like I did with Ms. Hamila by giving you 10 minutes just to hear your view about what has been happening in Ethiopia. Um, we've been talking since June. This is August. June, July, August has been a very long time. So hopefully people would remember everything that we talked about in June with Hamela as well. So without further ado, because I want to keep this short and sweet, not to bore anyone, just so people remember what we talk about. Miss Meaza, first of all, let me say your name correctly. Meaza Gebremedhin. Did I get it right? I did. Awesome. Please introduce yourself. Tell us where you're calling from. You are muted at your end. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi Adela. Thank you so
Hi.
much for having me.
Sure.
Hi everybody. My name is Meaza Gebremedhin. I am coming in live from Virginia. I am from Tigray. Tigray is the northernmost part of Ethiopia. I wanted to come to your show primarily because there was a lot of misinformation and disinformation with regards to the ongoing state-sponsored genocide that has engulfed Tigray since November 4th of 2020. I believe your audience deserves to have a balanced information. Your audience has the right to know what actually is happening on the ground. So, due to the misinformation and disinformation that was broadcasted through your show, I wanted to come and clarify on certain issues. I asked to have the same kind of opportunity that was granted to your previous guest, which is not to share the platform with opposing views or anything like that, but to have the time to explain what's happening from the perspective of a Tigran, a person who has been at the receiving end of the ongoing genocide for over 21 months now. So thank you so much for accepting the request and providing a platform. As I said, I do come from Tigray. I was born and raised in Tigray, but also lived in different parts of Ethiopia. I, like so many other Tigrans in the diaspora, have been directly affected by the ongoing state-sponsored genocide. I have lost family members, and I haven't heard from most of my family members, but the ones I heard of, a lot of them have died due to the endless suffering that has been inflicted upon them by the Ethiopian government and its allies from Eritrea. Some of my family members have died due to the state sponsored and man made famine. Some of them have been gang raped, some of them have been killed by members of the military army from Ethiopia. So it's at the backdrop of this that I am here to talk about the ongoing state sponsored genocide that has been happening by the Ethiopian government and the Eritrean government. As I said, since November 4th, Ethiopia and Eritrea waged a genocidal war upon the people of Tigray. Since then, according to very credible resources that were published by universities in Europe, over 500,000 people have already died in Tigray. Over 120,000 young women and girls have been gang raped by military men. We very well know that famine is being used as a war tactic in addition to gender based violence. So we have been calling for unfettered and unrestricted humanitarian corridor to be granted to international humanitarian aid agencies so that people could have access to medicine, to food, and be saved. We have been asking for cessation of hostilities. We have been asking for an independent investigation that would be led by an impartial body, particularly the UN. We have also been calling for an inclusive national dialogue so that political differences within Ethiopia could be resolved through peace talks and not war bullets like the Ethiopian government seems to believe. Nonetheless, despite our efforts, the Ethiopian government continues to show that it's not willing and ready for peace talks, but that they want to starve the people of Tigray to subjugation. And as an extension of that policy, they have put Tigray under a complete siege without any means of communicating our family members back home. So there still is no internet, there is still no banking services that the people could use to save their lives. There still is no any ground or flight access to the people of Tigray. So as a result, our family members, over around 10 million of them in Tigray, are suffering at the hands of the Ethiopian and the Eritrean state.
Wow, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your view. Thank you for giving all these updates. So I want to start real quick. First of all, about how the war started. So the reports that we have is that the Tigrayan army attacked the Ethiopian military base. What do you have to say about this?
First of all, when you talk about a genocide, I don't think there should ever be any
I
excuse, any
didn't say
justification.
genocide. I
No,
didn't
no,
mention
I'm
genocide.
talking about genocide. So when we discuss a genocide, I don't think there is any ground that would justify it. No matter how it starts, a genocide is a genocide, it's a crime, and everyone should work towards ending it. Having said
I'm
that,
not
how
sure
the
you
war
heard my
began.
question. I'm not
No,
sure you
I'm
heard
about
my
to answer
question.
your question
Oh,
if you.
okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
how the war on Tigray began is not only shouldn't be limited to what happened on November 4th. There has been events that led up to it, starting with cutting transportation that connects Tigray to the mainland. The fact that the Ethiopian government didn't do anything to fix that problem. The fact that foreign investors that wanted to invest in Tigray were blocked in Addis Ababa. The fact that over 60,000 Tigrans who were in the Middle East and wanted to come to return back to Ethiopia following the pandemic eruption were denied access by the Ethiopian government and they were labeled as terrorist people. The fact that the Ethiopian government had cut budget. This happened all prior to November 4th, and these developments are really important in understanding how the war actually began. Having said all of this, on November 4th, the Ethiopian government knew the world would give more attention to what was happening in the US, which is the presidential election. So, by taking the advantage of that incident, the Ethiopian government waged a war against the people of Tigray, particularly the Tigray government that was elected by the people on November 2020. So, this happened because the Ethiopian government wanted to centralize power. They wanted to dismantle the multinational federalism that has put Ethiopia intact together for over 30 years. So there has been developments that were already brewing, and Tigray was already being encircled militarily. There was huge military movement from Eritrea and Amhara, and the European Union had already issued a statement regarding this, urging all actors to really stay calm and not to engulf into war. But despite all these calls, the
Mhm.
Ethiopian government waged the war against the people of Tigray on November 4th.
Okay, so Miss Miaza, I'm not sure you heard my question, or it's either that or you purposely decided not to answer my question.
I
So for
actually
those
did.
who are not from Ethiopia, the Tigrayan military attacked the Ethiopian military base and killed some soldiers overnight. That was not the only thing that led to the war, but that was one of the things that led to the war. That was actually when the war started, when soldiers were killed by the Tigrayan forces. Tigrayans are also Ethiopians. So it's like one ethnic group, correct me if I'm wrong, now attacked a military base and killed other ethnic groups on a military base. So I'm asking you about that particular incident because for some reason you jumped into massacre. The massacre, according to you, happened after the military base was attacked. Now I'm talking about the reason why the war started, and I'm trying to hear your opinion about it. A lot of Ethiopians are saying that the Tigrayans were the ones that started the war, started in the sense that they attacked a military base and then said that they are the victims. And I just want to hear your opinion about this. Is it true, first of all? Well, it is true. We saw the videos and pictures. It's not denied that the Tigrayan forces attacked a military base. I'm not taking any sides. Hold
Oh,
on.
well, you are.
No,
You
no,
actually
hold
are.
on.
You're saying
I'm not
it's
taking
true.
any
No,
side,
no, you are,
but I
because you
like to
just
hear
said
your
it is
opinion.
true. I don't
Right,
think as a journalist
Miss
it's your
Meaza,
place to say what is true and
I'm
not true.
I'm I'm the one doing the interview. I did notice that
Uh,
you did not answer that question. You went into talking about genocide. I'm asking you about how the war started. Do you mind talking about the attack by the Tigrayan forces on the Ethiopian military base? Do you mind addressing that?
I actually addressed it, but I can emphasize if you would like me to. I did give you the things that happened prior to November 1st because it's really important. As I said, it helps you to understand why certain
Are
things
you
were
saying
done.
those things justified the Tigrayan forces
I didn't say that.
killing? Okay, so
Mm-mm.
I'm wondering why you're referring to that without answering the attack on the military base.
Because at the core of the conflict that's happening is there is an ideological battle. There is an ideological war amongst the Ethiopian government and the people of Tigray, and that is the Ethiopian government, particularly Abiy Ahmed and his regime, wanted to have a unitary Ethiopia, a type of governance that denies nation and nationalities the right to be self-governed and self-administered. The people of Tigray want the right, the democratic and constitutional right of self administration. What that means is we want to have the right to elect our representatives, our governors, our politicians. So on November 2020, the Ethiopian government tried to topple up the regional government of Tigray, a government that was elected by the people of Tigray. So they tried to do that by fabricating this narrative of the people of Tigray or their defense forces attacking the Northern Command. Just so you know, the Northern Command, majority of them are Tigrants, members of the Northern Command, majority of them are Tigrants. On November 3rd, midnight, there was an attempt to forcefully and unconstitutionally topple up the elected government of Tigray. So the government had no any other option but to defend because there was an attempt, an attack on our constitutional right, self determination. There was an attempt to subjugate us. As a result of that, the people of Tigray had to defend their constitutional right of self administration. That's what happened. But that is not really the important factor, is you have to look at the bigger picture. Why did the Ethiopian government, the Eritrean government wanted to start this conflict? That is what people should understand, not really the specific actions that happened. And if you want to understand that particular reason, you have to look into what happened once Abiy Ahmed assumed power. What happened to the people of Tigray? What were the policies, the narratives that were being pushed by the Ethiopian government and their allies? If you're not willing to understand those things, then I'm afraid you will have only a surface level understanding of the conflict, and you may not be able to contribute positively towards ending the suffering of innocent people.
So, just to clarify, you said that the story was made up. The military base was not attacked, right?
I don't know. I don't know where you're hearing only certain things. I'm saying there are developments that took place prior to November 1st. These are developments that clearly showed the intent of the Ethiopian government, Eritrean government, to topple up the duly elected government of Tigray in a such manner they wanted to take away our constitutional right and democratic right of self-determination. You cannot really only look at what happened November 4th. If you want to understand why the people of Tigray have been at the receiving end of this level of violence, you have to see what took place prior to November 4th.
Okay. Um, Also, is it true that for 2 years that the Ethiopian government had been trying to negotiate with the Tigrayan elders for 2 years to come to a peaceful agreement? Is this true? Please let me hear your opinion about this.
So once Abiy Ahmed assumed power, he was not elected. He was nominated by the coalition political party that administered Ethiopia for over 30 years, called EPRDF. One of the things he did was he abruptly dissolved that coalition of political governance. TPLF, which is a representative of the people of Tigray, was one member of that coalition party. So when he did that, the people of Tigray saw what was coming, and what was coming is the desire of forming a unitary state. So, because of the people of Tigray, through their political representative, disagreed. They said there has to be a system that allows nation and nationalities to be represented by the people they voted for. And to that effect, the people of Tigray, through their political rejected the notion of dissolving the APRDF. They rejected the notion that the Ethiopian government wanted to unconditionally postpone the elections. So to facilitate, to find some kind of solution to all of this, there were efforts that were pushed by the Ethiopian government, that were pushed by the Tigray government. The Tigray government was calling for an inclusive national dialogue whereby political representatives from all nations and nationalities will come together and discuss ways on resolving that political tension. The Ethiopian government, on the other hand, had handpicked people that were sent to Tigray to intimidate the people of Tigray into accepting the terms of the Ethiopian government. This is what is being framed as an effort or as an elderly effort that was laid by the Ethiopian government.
I see. Do the Tigrayans want to have their own government separated from the Ethiopian government?
What the people of Tigray, myself included, want is peace and security. We don't want to be hunted simply because of our ethnic background. We want to have access to food. We want to have access to internet, to our money in the banks. We want to have access to security and stability. We want the siege that has been imposed by the Ethiopian government on our people to be lifted. We want all invading forces to leave our land, including Western Tigray, including northern parts of Tigray, particularly Europe, which is currently under the illegal occupation of the Eritrean forces. This is what we want.
Definitely you want peace. I agree with that. But the reason I asked my question is I do remember that the Tigrayans had an election and elected their own leaders separately from the Ethiopian national election. That's why I'm asking that do the Tigrayans want to be their own country separate from Ethiopia?
So, according to, I don't know how familiar you are with the Ethiopian constitution, but according to the Ethiopian constitution, every 5 years, Ethiopia is supposed to have national, regional, and municipal election. So, what was supposed to happen in 2019, or I'm sorry if I forget the years, but is that Ethiopia was due to have its national, regional, and municipal election. Ethiopians were supposed to vote for their local representatives, their municipal representatives, and their federal government representatives. So according to that constitutional framework, Ethiopians were supposed to have, including Tigrants, were supposed to have election at the regional level and at the national level. So the national election was meant in order, to form a government that would administer the entire country. And the regional elections are supposed to form a government that will administer each and every region within the Ethiopian Federation. So the Ethiopian government, of course, like I said earlier, used COVID-19 as an excuse and erode democracy, and they unilaterally postponed the election. But Tigray still had the constitutional right to carry out its regional elections to elect people that would administer the region and be representatives of the region in the federal structure. So we went ahead and had our election, and it was peaceful. There was no any dramatic increase in COVID-19. Over 95% of the electorate voted for the TPLF, and a government was formed.
I see. But would the Tigrayans like to be a country of their own or not?
I am here in the US. I cannot decide for the people of Tigray that are on the ground, but what would help us find an answer to that is in the siege, in the conflict, in the genocide, and let the people have a referendum and see what they choose.
Considering that you have your own military.
We do have a military that was established because the Ethiopian government and Eritrean government waged a war against us, and we had to defend ourselves.
So your military was never in existence until the war started?
We didn't have a military. We did had a regional militias, which is apparent everywhere in Amhara and Oromia region across the country. We do have militia groups.
Okay. Could you talk a little bit about reports of child soldiers, people being forced to fight to get humanitarian aid? Is there any truth to this in the Tigrayan region?
Again, this is a narrative that has been pushed by the Ethiopian government and its allies in order to evade responsibility. And nonetheless, what I and every Tigrayan person will tell you is we want an independent investigation that would look into all allegations, including allegations surrounding child soldiers. We don't have anything to hide. And if the Tigray government is to be found responsible for such kind of things, they will be held accountable. But even themselves, they have been expressing their willingness and readiness for an independent investigation. Yet again, it's the Ethiopian government that continues to refuse and block any efforts of impartial, independent investigation.
I see. I'm going to be letting in questions from the audience in few minutes, but for those who may be joining us, I had spoken with Hamela Arigawi previously, shedding a light to the other side of the story. So if you see me asking her these questions, is because they're coming from, having heard from the other side and trying to hear from her side of the story as well. That's why I will ask questions like, is this true? Is this true? Is this true? Do you mind shedding light a bit on the role of the diasporan Ethiopians in the diaspora on the ongoing war? I do have a number of questions on that, but first of all, you are also in the diaspora. Do you mind shedding light on the role of the Ethiopian diaspora on what's happening right now in Ethiopia?
Sure. So as a Tigray myself, I came here for school for studies. My plan was to go back home upon the completion of my studies and contribute towards the betterment of my society. That dream has been shattered because of the ongoing genocide. I don't have a
When
place
did
to
you
go
leave
home.
Ethiopia?
Well, I was last in Ethiopia August of 2019, and I came here for studies. So as I said, I wanted to go back home once I finished school, but now I cannot go back home because my home has been ravaged by war. So a lot of people like myself and those who were born and raised here, they woke up to the horrors of the genocide on November 4th. So a lot of them didn't know what to do. So we all came together, particularly members of the Tigray community. We all came together to raise awareness about what our family members were experiencing in the dark. So we have been doing, I would say, quite an amazing job regarding, despite the fact that we're historically an marginalized group of people, we have been able to raise awareness about the suffering of our people. On the other hand, there are a lot of Ethiopians who have access to power, finance, connections that tried to, paint an alternative fact of what's happening. They harass us, they bully us everywhere. I myself there has been an assassination attempt against my safety when I was leading a protest, simply because I called for the end of the genocide, simply because I asked for peace. But at the same time, it's really important to understand that although the genocide is happening in Tigray, there are also different conflicts happening all across Ethiopia. So members of the Oromo community, the Command, the Agaw have also been very vocal and opposing against the Ethiopian government. So you would see different fractions of the Ethiopian community pushing different initiatives asking for the war to come to an end. But
And
unfortunately,
one of the things that the Ethiopians in diaspora have been doing is raising funds for.
mhm.
So, how's the money getting to the people? Is are the banks working? Like, what has that process been like?
I don't know. Maybe you should ask the Ethiopians. I'm Tigran. So as a Tigran, I know there has been different. We have different non-profit organizations. They have been leading resource mobilization efforts in order to provide humanitarian aid to those in Sudan. Mind you, we have over 70,000 people who made it out of the war zone before the Ethiopian government blocked the safe zone, the safe passage through Western Tigray, and they have made it to Sudan. So there is quite a dire need. This over 70,000 civilians are people that have been, went through a lot of traumatic experiences. So they do deserve a lot of humanitarian support. So the different nonprofit organizations we have been leading efforts to provide that support for them. So I may not be necessarily the right person to talk about that because I'm not in charge of any humanitarian organization, but I know for a fact that they have been doing quite an incredible job. Regarding the other Ethiopians, I wouldn't know. Maybe you should ask them.
You can always say, I don't have an answer to that. But when you say maybe you should ask Ethiopians or Tigrayans, I'm not sure what you mean or why you would say that, because that's why I have you on the show. But if you don't
No,
know the
because
answer,
there are a lot of
that's
because there are a
understandable.
lot of
But
initiatives
you
to
can just say
raising
you
money.
should ask Ethiopia or ask. as
Because I am not because
Tigrayan.
I'm Tigran, so I'm
But
giving you answers as an
exactly,
Ethiopian.
you are
Mhm.
Tigrayan, and
Yeah.
you've talked about how family members have been affected, and that you have family members that are still back home. And I'm asking you how they're getting aids that is coming from here. And you're saying that I
Because
should
as I
ask
said,
Ethiopians
as
and
I
ask
said,
Tigray. Okay, your
no,
family members that are still in Tigray, how
no,
are you
I
getting
told
help
you.
to them?
Like I said, my family members that are in Ethiopia and Tigray do not have access to their banks. So even if I want to send money, they wouldn't be able to
And that's
access
exactly
it.
why I asked this question. There has been a lot of people raising funds in the diaspora. And I do know from some of the things that you have said in the past, for example, that banks are not working right now in
Yeah.
Tigray. And I'm asking how, because a lot of money have been raised. And I'm asking, how's this money getting to the people, or how is help getting to the people?
No, so to answer to that question, I told you a lot of nonprofit organizations that were established in response to the genocide have been supporting and providing humanitarian aid to the refugees in Sudan. When it comes to Tigray, like everyone else, we don't have access. There is no
So
unfiltered
it's the
access, so
refugees
we're not
in
able to help
Sudan
people in
that
Tigray.
are being helped, not necessarily.
In Tigray, yeah.
Because you could have just
Not
said
only
that.
in
Because,
In Djibouti, there are also some in Kenya.
okay, you could have just said that. Um,
I don't think you should monitor what kind of answers I give. I think I should give an answer
I
that is
do,
appropriate for
because when
personal
I ask
situation.
questions, I'm expecting that you would answer. That's what you said you would do before coming on the show. But then I asked a reasonable question, and your answer was maybe you should go and ask the Ethiopian government or ask the
Because
Tigray.
I don't know what they're doing with the
No, no,
money.
it's fine.
I'm
I'm
not
not
going to
arguing
give
with
you
you.
answers for questions I don't know.
You
So I
finally
would only
answered,
give you answers
which
for the
I
questions I
appreciate.
know.
You
Mhm.
finally answered, which I appreciate. The reason I asked that question, just so you know, is from speaking with some Ethiopians, there have been some allegations which I do not have any evidence for, that some Ethiopians in the diaspora, in the name of fighting for the people in the Tigray region, have raised a lot of money without necessarily getting it to the people. And I do know that the banks are not working. So I was thinking that you would help us clarify that and talk about how they're actually getting the money to the people. Nobody is trying to get rich off of victims. So that's why I asked you that question. But um, thank you for the response that you gave. I would move on.
I would actually love to address those issues you raised
Oh,
if you would allow me
now
to.
you want to? Please be my guest. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
because so the problem is, you ask questions and you have answers in your head. So
No,
when
I
I
do
don't
not
say
have
that,
answers in
that's
my
the
head. If
problem.
I
You
have
do.
answers, I won't
You
ask
actually
you.
do. You
So
actually
first
do.
you told me to go ask the Ethiopian or the Tigray. Second, you telling me I have
No,
answers in
because
my
you're
head.
telling me, because you just said it right now, Adole. Let's be honest, we're adults here, right? You just said I asked you because I have heard this things, right? If you had
Yes,
asked said
I said
that,
I've heard things that I wanted you to
if you
clarify.
had said
But now
that,
you
if you
said
had
I
said that
have
ahead
answers
of
in my
time,
head.
I would have given you
Miss
clarification. None.
Meaza, I have never been to Ethiopia. I am not Ethiopia. I'm just trying to make sense. We're and not just me.
Unfortunately, you
We
have been fed
all,
with
and we don't take
misinformation.
any sides. We just want peace.
You
You know
don't
how
take
many
any
times I've
sides.
talked about let peace reign in Ethiopia? It's good to see you smile right now, because the other time, I don't know, maybe you were upset or something, telling me maybe, I don't know, maybe you should ask the government and you have answers in your head. But now that you're smiling, I like to hear your answer, if you don't mind clarifying this. And please keep in mind, I am not on any side. I'm not fighting with you. And it's like you're fighting with me or something, but I'm not. I'm not
I'm
fighting
not
with you.
fighting with
I
you,
just
actually.
wanted
I'm
to
not
hear your
fighting
side.
with you.
All right.
As
So
a
what do you have to
journalist,
say about that?
yeah, I'm not fighting with you. As a journalist, I'm asking you, not to fall into the traps of misinformation. Because if you had told me, I have heard this kind of rumors, and I know you guys have been mobilizing resources. Is the money going to this as it's being alleged? If you had
Exactly.
asked me that way, I would have answered it. But you didn't disclose the
Well, I was
information.
trying to. And then
No,
when
no,
you
you
said
didn't.
maybe you
Anyways,
should ask
we're
the
here. Let me
Ethiopians.
answer your
All right.
question.
Answer the
Anyways, let
question.
me answer your question. there has been a lot of allegations aimed at painting a picture that is more convenient for the Ethiopian government and that will be used to justify and cover up the genocide. As I told you, any allegation should be supported by evidence. If there is anybody that actually has a concrete evidence that money has been mobilized by the Tigrayan community in order to fuel a war, bring that evidence forward. Talk is cheap. People can say anything they want. If the Ethiopian government and its supporters do not have any problem to rape a 4 years old young girl, they wouldn't have a problem to fabricate this kind of narratives in order to silence us. So what I wanted to emphasize as a Tigrayan again is that we have been raising funds, we have been mobilizing funds in order to support the displaced, the people that have been forced and kicked out of their homeland in Tigray after suffering a genocide. So there are a lot of victims. So we do have a responsibility of providing them with humanitarian assistance, and that's what the Tigrayan community have been doing to date. As regards to other Ethiopians that have been mobilizing funds, I do not know what they do with the money. I know for a fact a lot of lobbying firms have been hired by the Ethiopian government and by members of the Ethiopian community in the diaspora. I don't know if where that money is going to. I do not know. That's why I asked you to ask them instead of me giving you answers that I'm not sure of because I don't have the evidence. I hope that clarifies your question now.
Thank you very much. That does clarify things. Let's talk about the rape issue. I have reported several times on using rape as a weapon in the
Mhm.
Tigray region. I have reported about so many Tigrayan women who not just talked about being raped, but also had many of them were killed actually, and I've featured some Tigrayan women who said that they were raped and their children were killed. I featured a hospital in the Tigrayan region filled with women who said that they had been raped. So I wanted to hear your opinion about this. Also, the other side is saying that the TPLF forces had been using rape even before the war started. But I reported on the rape that was happening when the war started. So, what do you have to say about this?
Can you clarify what you mean by you have reported about rape when
So
the war started?
I reported rape being used as a weapon when the war started,
By
and
whom?
by the military forces. When I
From Ethiopia.
reported this, from what the women said, it was like both sides using rape. But I basically talked about the women's stories because there were videos coming out from these women. But what I'm asking you is to not just talk about rape being used as a weapon to clarify, but also to address when the other side says, oh, the TPLF have been using rape even before the war started.
Okay. So one of the so-called evidence that genocide apologists use in order to consolidate that narrative is that my activism prior to November 4th of 2020. As a Tigrayan who believed that gender parity can be achieved, myself and so many other brave feminists in Tigray had established a movement that advocates for equality between both genders. We did this because we were empowered enough to envision a Tigray that will do better in terms of empowering women, empowering both genders equally. Such kind of movements are not apparent anywhere else. We live in a developed, you and I live in the US, right? So we do see a lot of movements here. There's the Times Up, the Me Too, and so many other movements.
Hmm.
And you look at what happens in countries such as Saudi Arabia, where women's right is barely recognized, and there is no single movement there. The fact that there are a lot of movements here in the US, it doesn't show that women's right in the US is overly, violated compared to what happens in Saudi Arabia. But it shows you that at least women in the US do know their rights. They know their rights. They are empowered enough to speak up and to work towards a better society. That's exactly what happened in Tigray. I am not here to say that women's right is respected globally. We know that everywhere in the world, including in parts of Ethiopia, women's right is violated every day. in different forms and shapes. So in Tigray, you did have people like me that said that is not right. So we all came together and we were working with the religious figures, with political figures, with community leaders in order to create a more equitable society. That's what happened. But there is also a very distinct difference between rape when it's being used as a war tactic and rape when it happens in day-to-day life. A weaponized gender-based violence is it's a violence that is instructed and comes from the higher up. So members of the Ethiopian army were recorded, on tape recorded, admitting that they had instructed their soldiers to rape Tigrayan mothers and Tigrayan girls. And the ultimate goal in doing that wasn't just simply to violate the Tigrayan body, the women's. It was actually to terrorize the community and send a message that the Tigrayan ethnic line shouldn't continue to exist. So people need to understand that there is a distinct difference between gender-based violence when it happens in day-to-day life and when it's weaponized. Now, when it comes to this conflict, as I said earlier, according to reports from the Tigray Regional Health Bureau, over 120,000 young girls as young as 14 years old and 8 years old have been gang raped by members of the Ethiopian and Eritrean National Army. When they raped them, we have heard stories that were published by independent rights groups such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and international media outlets, including BBC, the CNN, Reuters, Associated Press, and what have you. The victims themselves have told these journalists and independent rights groups that their rapists were telling them that they were doing it in order to cleanse their ethnic line, in order to ensure that a Tigrayan womb doesn't continue to give birth. So this clearly shows the genocidal intent of the weaponized rape. So this is actually what happened. But as I said earlier, anyone that is interested in finding out the truth, instead of listening to my story or listening to the other side story, what they should do is advocate for an impartial and independent investigation that will be led by the UN so that members of this investigation committee could have access to all victims, particularly those in Tigray, and hear it for themselves and find out what actually happened on the ground.
Thanks for clarifying that. Rape is never um, anything that could be justified regardless of, the situation. And from what I'm hearing from you is that it is true that rape had been an issue in the Tigrayan region
That's
before the
not
war
what
started.
No, that's not what I
Well,
say. I
you
say
said,
rape
hold
is
on,
an
let me
issue
tell you what
everywhere
I
in the
understand.
world. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know you are saying everywhere in the world, but and I'm not saying that rape is not being used by the military. I've also featured reports that I've seen about that. But okay, from what you're saying just like everywhere in the world, women's right was not that respected in the Tigrayan region before the war started, and that rape was an issue just like everywhere in the world. That's what you're saying, right? And then when the war started, you're saying that the Ethiopian military deliberately used weapon as a war tactic as well. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is gender parity was not achieved in Tigray, as it is the case everywhere else. So myself and so many other people have been working towards achieving gender parity. Gender parity is when
But rape
boys
was never an issue in the Tigrayan region.
it's not just rape. I don't know where you're only focusing on rape. Our movement, our work was not limited just to rape. We were working towards creating equality of, political equality, social and economic equality of both genders in Tigray. That's what we were working towards. So we were empowering our women. We were talking about gender-based violence and how harmful it is. We were talking about backward traditional, gender roles. We're talking about so many other issues. We're talking about rape. But this kind of thing is not unique to Tigray. And it was not TPLF as a political actor wasn't the only actor that we were working with. We were working with, as I said, with religious figures, political figures, community leaders, in order to encourage our community to do more than what they had already done in terms of empowering both genders equally so that we can see a more developed and prosperous community. That's what we have been doing. But purposefully, the other side, in order to justify the gender based violence that has been waged against the people of Tigray, they keep on dragging this conversation and bringing up our previous activism and advocacy work. So when I talk to journalists, I want to present the bigger picture of what we were doing, because what they're doing is a very reductive, analysis of our work. That's why
Okay.
I'm not really indulging into that
And
particular.
again, I'm not trying to justify using rape as a weapon in this war. What's happening is terrible. Like I said, I've featured so many videos of Tigrayan women that I have seen telling their stories. It's heartbreaking, actually. And a lot of those women may never, fully recover unless they have like therapy, or because rape is not just something that happens physically. There's also the mental effect. There's the emotional effect. There's it's all way around. So I am not justifying the fact that the military is reportedly using that as weapon as well. I was just asking to know whether or not what had happened even before the war started. And we all strongly condemn using rape and also killing women, gender-based violence in general. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I will start taking the people's question. I do know that there was a time that the Ethiopian prime minister was willing to cease fire and negotiate for peace. But the reports that we got at the time was that the Tigrayan forces were not willing to cease fire and dialogue for peace. You had said earlier that what you want as Tigrayans is peace. So, what
Mhm.
happened when the prime minister wanted to cease fire and dialogue about peace?
When was that? You said you do know, so you're presented as a fact. So when did that actually happen?
I believe this was June of last year.
That's not. What is your resource? Like, this is news to me. I didn't know the prime minister on June of last year had actually expressed what happened in June of 2020, 2021. Actually, is that um, the Tigrayan Defense Forces had effectively destroyed the Ethiopian National Army at the Battle of Alula, and after that, the Ethiopian government was forced to retrieve any troops that it had left in Tigray, particularly in parts of Mekelle. So they did run away from Mekelle after their forces were destroyed by the TDF, and in order to hide this humiliation, they came up with this notion of unilateral ceasefire. I studied international studies and international relations. In all of my studies, I've never come across any concept as unilateral ceasefire. For ceasefire to be recognized as a ceasefire, it should be agreed upon by both warring parties. There is no unilateral ceasefire. Nonetheless, after the TDF destroyed the ANDF, like I said, they were forced to flee. So after that, the Tigray Defense Forces and the Tigray government and the people of Tigray have been calling for a peaceful resolution to the genocide. So they have been calling for peace talks. But although there has been, a seemingly positive developments around that area, but there hasn't been any meaningful or concrete steps taken by the Ethiopian government to prove that it is indeed ready for peace talks and for negotiations. So when he said
So,
Abiy Ahmed was willing, I didn't know where exactly he said that.
okay. So, according to Voice of America, on June 14th, the Ethiopian Prime Minister announced the formation of a committee to begin a peace talk with the leaders of the Tigrayan region. So the Prime Minister set up a committee to begin peace talk. So you did not hear anything about that.
Like I said prior to that, the Tigray Defense Forces had destroyed, and you can find evidence of such development published by the New York Times, by the Economist, by the CNN, and any other media outlet. So after that happened, there has been efforts to find peaceful resolution that were primarily pushed by Western actors, the UN, the European Union, the US government have been calling for both warring parties to sit and find like peaceful ways of resolving the conflict. The Tigray government and the people have always been ready and willing to find peaceful solution to this. So according to that, we have been calling for an inclusive national dialogue. The Ethiopian government is not willing to do that. If you want to have peace talks, first you lift the humanitarian siege that has been imposed on Tigray. You let the people of Tigray have access to food and to medicine. You let them use the money that are in their banks. You let them talk to their parents. You lift the communication blockade. After that, you can talk about negotiating and discussing political matters. But you cannot conflate humanitarian issues and political issues and expect the people of Tigray to uh, to be
Oh,
okay with that
sorry.
development.
Reading the comment, I just saw that I said last year. I think it was this year. So what you are saying is that if they truly want peace, they should first of all meet certain conditions. But are you then are you saying that there was never a time that the prime minister extended the hand of dialogue with the Tigrayan
Yes.
forces?
Yeah.
Was there?
Yeah, no, there has never been any genuine interest and initiative taken by the Ethiopian government to find peaceful resolution. And what I'm saying is, it's not a precondition. When you ask to have access to food and to water, it's not a precondition. You're actually asking to differentiate humanitarian issues from political issues. You can always negotiate about political issues. You know, what type of governance should we have? What should be the Ethiopian state building process going forward? These are issues that can be resolved through political discussions, but access to humanitarian aid should not be up for discussion. We have seen it in so many different countries. Even in the most devastating conflict in Syria, humanitarian organizations had access to people to provide humanitarian aid. In Tigray, that's not what's happening. What's happening is the Ethiopian government had, in effect, put Tigray under a complete siege. Humanitarian organizations cannot access parts of Tigray as much as they should and save human lives. And the Ethiopian government is saying, yeah, we're not going to give you access to food and to water, but we still want you to come in to discuss. Discuss about what?
Also, they did say they want them to come and discuss. It's just that certain conditions have not been met. I just want to be clear that I'm not making this up.
So that's the problem, though. You're calling it a condition. It's not a precondition. It's not a condition. These are two different
So
issues.
it's what I
Humanitarian and political
call
issues
it
are two
that is
different.
wrong. Okay. So
Pardon?
it's what I'm calling it that is wrong, but they try to negotiate for peace. It's just that they didn't meet the conditions of the Tigrayans.
It's not a condition. The Ethiopian government used the same line argument that you're using. That's how they call it. They say, we're willing to speak at any point, at any time, without any precondition.
Okay,
They
that's
say
so
this.
that people know that I didn't make it up. So
No, they say that.
you are aware that the government wanted to speak because you said
No,
you
the
never.
government doesn't want to speak. That's the problem. You're saying the government wants to speak. The government doesn't want to speak. If the government wants indeed to speak and find peaceful resolution to what's happening, they should first let the people have access to food and to medicine. If my family do not have water to drink, what am I going to talk about? You know, first let the people have access to
Yeah,
food, let them exist as
I'm
human
gonna
beings, and
start
after that, you can
taking.
talk politics.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna start taking questions from the audience. But from what I understand, from what you just explained, um, the government is, from what you said, according to you, is that the government is starving the people, so there's nothing really to discuss. But that's different from saying that you've never heard of any instance where the government was willing to talk about peace.
That's I don't know how I should explain this. The government is purposefully trying to subjugate the people of Tigray into submission by starving them to
Okay.
death. So in order to support that, what they're doing is they're saying they impose sanction, they impose blockade and siege on Tigray. They ensure the people of Tigray do not have access to anything that a human being needs to survive. And then they're saying, while I have your neck on chalk, I want to talk to you. If you have your hand on my neck, on my throat, how can I talk to you?
So,
So
but they
what
did
we're
say
saying,
that they
let
wanted to
go of my
talk.
neck.
I'm not
No, but you can,
justifying that, there's still a siege against, I'm not justifying any of that. But just so that the audience are not confused, the government did say they wanted to talk. That's what I
They
brought up.
didn't say they wanted to talk. This is what, so, the problem is you can look at things at a grand scheme and you can just take like the surface level understanding of what's happening. If you have your hand on my throat and if you say, I want to talk to you, in effect, you don't want to talk to me. If you want to talk to me, then first you would let go of my throat, and then you would say, I want to talk to you. But that's not what's happening. And important thing here is, in order, rather than just simply talking about
So
what
what
the
you're
Ethiopian
saying is the
government
government
is
is
saying.
making demands, not negotiations. That's
Yes.
okay. You could have said that, but when you said
No,
outright
because
that
as a journalist,
there
you do
has
have the
never been,
responsibility to present what both sides are saying. The Tigray
so
government
it's
has
like
been
your
saying,
interpretation of, what's of what's happening is that the government is making demands, not negotiation. That's
yeah.
okay. Awesome. So I'm going to start taking questions from the viewers. I'm looking through the comment section, and it's like, oh my goodness. First of all, you have a lot of fans, people saying that you're speaking for the Tigrayans and how much they love you and so on. So you do have a lot of fans in the comment section. You also have a lot of enemies in the comment section, people saying that you are a mouthpiece for terrorists, just so that you're prepared. It's always, both sides, and I knew that even before doing this. And then of course I have people abusing me for asking you some questions, which is okay. And at the same time, I do have people who said, oh, thanks for trying to make sense of all that is happening at Diola and so on. And some people that are excited about questions that I'm asking you. So just so you know, it's everything in the comment section. So I'm going to be careful in the comments that I bring on here, because I'm not trying to start a fight or start a war. But the very first question that I will bring on the screen, sorry, is actually from a Nigerian, I believe. This person's name is Joy Dada. And their question is, under normal circumstances, was Tigray supposed to respect the decision of the government to withhold election due to COVID-19?
Under normal circumstance, the Ethiopian Federation, not just only the federal government, all of them were supposed to come together and make such a decision collectively. A federal government structure, by its nature, what it does is it does give certain power to the region and certain power to the federal government. So in such kind of political arrangement, under normal circumstances, all members of that federation, including the government of Tigray, were supposed to come together and reach at a conclusion. But as I told you earlier, once Abiy Ahmed assumed power, one of the things he did right after he assumed power is dissolve that political structure, because all he wanted was to establish a unitarist government so that regions would be denied of any type of power the constitution had granted them. So, by way of doing that, the federal government wanted to decide unilaterally, so they dissolved the political coalition and then they decided to postpone the election. So, the Tigray government used its mandate stipulated in the Ethiopian constitution and held the elections.
Okay. Before I move on to the next question, one of the questions that I meant to ask you is to tell us the present condition of the people of Tigray. I was actually hoping that you would address that at the beginning when I gave you that 10 minutes, but you actually didn't finish the 10 minutes. And then I jumped into questions, but I really apologize. I wanted to know what's the current situation of the people of Tigray.
People still in Tigray, well, Tigray is still under a complete blockade and siege. So it's still hard to understand the full impact the siege has been having on the people. But from the very limited access we do have to Tigray, we learn that people are dying in hundreds and thousands because of the famine, the man-made famine. Over 5 million Tigrants are still in need of humanitarian aid. Because their crops, their livelihood has been completely disseminated and destroyed by members of the Ethiopian Amhara and Amhara Ethiopian National Army and Eritrean National Army. So parts of Tigray are still under illegal occupation of Ethiopia and Eritrea, but the parts that has been liberated through the Tigray Defense Forces are still faced with shortage of humanitarian aid. There still isn't enough medicine, doctors, that could have saved lives don't even have the necessary equipment and medicine to save and treat patients with. People, as I say, do not have access to food, so people are dying. Mothers are having to choose whether to kill themselves or to see their children die first because of starvation. So the situation on the ground is quite grim, although due to a lot of work that has been put in by advocates in the diaspora, and because of the pressure coming from the international community, the Abiy Ahmed's regime has been forced to provide a very limited amount of humanitarian corridor to Tigray, and because of that, I would say, I think 31 convoys have made it successfully to Tigray, carrying food and medicine. But the problem is, as I said, according to reports from the UN, over 6 million people in Tigray are in need of humanitarian aid. So the 31 humanitarian convoy that made it in Tigray is not enough. But even if it was to be enough, there isn't enough fuel to distribute that food across to people that are in need across the region. So the humanitarian situation is still dire. People still don't have access to their banks. And particularly in western parts of Tigray, Humora, Walqait, and other cities, people are still living under the illegal occupation of Ethiopian forces, and they're languishing in prisons. Recently, there were around 15 people that have actually made it out of one of the concentration camps and in Tigray, in Western Tigray, and we have talked to them. They have talked to international media outlets, and the harrowing stories that they share is haunting. They talk about how children as young as 8 years old were imprisoned with them in the detention centers. So there is still gross violation of human rights. And other Tigrants that used to live in different parts of Ethiopia are still languishing in different intermediary camps. Particularly, Tigrants that used to be members of the Ethiopian National Army. These are highly decorated military men that have served Ethiopia on different capacities, are languishing across different concentration camps in Ethiopia. So the situation for civilian Tigrants is still dire, and there is still a need to push the Ethiopian government to lift the siege and to find peaceful resolution.
That's very, very sad. And, deepest condolences to people that have lost their loved ones. And it's just heartbreaking. War is never pretty. I remember when this started and we were all saying that Ethiopia should please not um, go to war, just because we know that you only know the beginning of war, but you never know how it will end. Just so you know, by the way, that when I interviewed Miss Hamila as well, I was asking her questions from your point of view. And at some point she felt the way you did, like, because like when I asked her about rape, for example, and I'm like, well, I've seen videos, I've seen, so I just put her out there so people know that I'm trying to get both sides of the story. Anyways, I would like to go on with another question that I saw. This is from Noel Brown. What's the purpose of the African Union? Why can the African people get along as one Africans? Um, could you say anything about intervention by the African Union?
Um, I think one thing I want fellow Africans to know, because there has been a lot of misinformation and disinformation around this by the genocide camp, is that Tigrans are proud Pan-Africanists. Tigrans, through our leaders, have fought for the independence, liberty, and unity of Africans, just like every other African. I am a very proud African and a proud proponent of Pan-Africanism. Nonetheless, the African Union has been quite a disappointment when it comes to preserving peace and standing on the side of victims. And when it comes to all this genocidal war, the African Union, particularly its chairman, Mr. Moussa Faki, and others, have been actively working with the Ethiopian government to support them in their efforts of exterminating the people of Tigray. So the African Union has in effect failed the people of Tigray. As an intergovernmental organization, you would expect the African Union to condemn any type of violence and urge all actors in a conflict to put the people's interest at heart. But instead of doing that, the African Union has actually been using talking points from the Ethiopian regime to justify what's happening. So, because of that, although I do believe Africans are capable of solving their problems, although I do believe we do have the power and the capacity to, if we all come together, to establish political systems that would help us respect human rights and democratic rights. The African Union hasn't been one. And what I want everybody to understand is that Pan Africanism is not necessarily about the governments. Pan Africanism is about the people, the Africans, the citizens. So if any government and any organization isn't working towards respecting the people's choice, respecting the people's right, then what good is it?
So the African Union has not been of much help.
It hasn't been helpful. It has actually been one of the
Right.
main problems.
I see. For the audience, please, if you're trying to ask a question, please just go straight to the question without putting abuses. If you're abusing and then asking question at the same time, that's probably why I'm not picking your question. You can just go straight to your question. You don't need to abuse my guest. It's okay, you can abuse me, but you don't need to abuse my guest in your question. That's why I'm not taking a lot of the comments that I wanted to put in. There were people putting abuse in the comments. Okay, I'm going to ask another question. This one is from Amia's Hustle. I don't know how true this is, but the person says, ask Meza, why does her TPLF still try to claim Badme? Badme was awarded to Eritrea over 20 years ago, but TPLF illegally occupied it for 2 decades.
First of all, for people who may not have clear
Background,
information as to where this, can you hear me?
yeah, background information about it.
Yeah, the background information is that Badme it's a city. It's one of the towns in Tigray, and the conflict. There was a border conflict between Ethiopia and Tigray. There has never been a war between Tigray. Sorry, there was a border conflict between Eritrea and Ethiopia. There has never been a war between Tigray and Eritrea in our history. So, but because it's not convenient for proponents of the Ethiopian and Eritrean regime, they always love to skip that fact. There has been a border conflict, and Ethiopia and Eritrea were on a deadlock for a very long time because the Ethiopian government didn't agree the decision that was made in Hague to decide that Badem belongs to Eritreans. The people who live in Badem actually protested that particular decision because that decision was not, demarcation was never made on the ground. That decision was reached at based on satellite imagery information. So the people who live in Badem, they said we're Tigrans, we're Ethiopians at that time. They said we're Ethiopians, we don't belong to Eritrea. So you cannot really force people to belong to some other country while they're protesting against that decision. Nonetheless, whatever happened to November 2024 doesn't matter. It doesn't justify what the people of Tigray are going today. So this kind of questions are presented in order to justify the violence that Eritrean and Ethiopian troops have inflicted upon the people of Tigray. My argument is that it doesn't matter what kind of history that had existed previously. Nothing justifies the level of brutality and war crime and crimes against humanity that the people of Tigray have been receiving from Ethiopia, Eritrea, and other local actors.
Thank you very much. And speaking of Eritrea, I do have one question about Eritrea. Ignore the other side of the comment. This is from Emia's Hustle, and he says Eritrea already withdrew, but, and this is what I mean by abuse, So I guess my question is, has the Eritrean forces withdrew from the Tigrayan region or not? Ignore the abuse in the question, please.
It's okay. They haven't. Actually, Eritreans are in parts of Tigray, primarily on the northern parts of Tigray. Tigray is home to smaller ethnic minorities two smaller ethnic minorities called Kunama and Europe. These are very, very small in terms of number, and they're very close to Eritrea. So Eritrea has been and still is in that part of Tigray from the very beginning. We haven't had any access to those parts of Tigray. They're issuing ID cards to those people, forcing them to change their identity. So Eritrea is full and well in Tigray. There is also a recent military movement, and previously we have heard that Eritreans have withdrawn from western parts of Tigray, but recently we learned that there was actually a new engulf or incoming of Eritrean troops to that parts of Tigray. So Eritreans are indeed in Tigray, and this is why we have been calling for an international body that will verify and monitor the withdrawal of Eritrean troops, so that you don't have to hear it from me, you don't have to hear it from someone else, but for an impartial body that would in effect see and verify and monitor the withdrawal of all these foreign forces, including Eritreans.
So there are two questions. Thank you. I'm about to ask two questions into one, because they basically talked about the same thing. The first one is from Abdi Omar, and he says, "Does Meza believe TPLF committed crimes against Ethiopians when they were in power for 27 years?" And along the same line, um, this question is from Ishak Ibrahim, and he says, "Are members of the tribes of this lady, the Tigrayans, are they also guilty of killing members of other tribes, like genocide?" So, along the same idea, someone is asking, when the TPLF was in government for 27 years, did they commit any crime against the Ethiopians? And someone else is asking whether or not they've been responsible for killing members of other uh, tribes.
Two facts. One, I don't believe that there has ever been a time where TPLF was single handedly administering Ethiopia. As I said earlier, there was a coalition party to which TPLF was a member, and at that time, there might have been violations of human rights, there might have been violation of any type of rights. For those violations, I demand, as a member of the Tigray community and as a human being, I demand an independent investigation that would look into those allegations, so that we don't base our opinion on our emotions rather than on facts. So that's what I will call on. When it comes, do I think my tribe is responsible for any genocide? I think that by itself, that kind of question is a genocidal question. First of all, Tigray is not a
The
tribe, it's an
person is not
ethnicity.
Ethiopian, they're just asking.
Yeah, it doesn't matter where the person is from. That line of argument is wrong and it needs to be called out. You cannot blame an entire group of people for any type of crime. You don't hear me blaming any type of ethnicity in Ethiopia for the genocide that is happening against the people of Tigray. We can hold actors accountable. We can hold political actors accountable. So, in that line of argument, the people of Tigray are not responsible for any type of genocide that has happened in Ethiopia. I don't think there is any genocide that has happened in Ethiopia by the people of Tigray. But if anyone wants to bring any claim against the political party, they I mean, I welcome anyone. I'm sure the government of Tigray or the TPLF wouldn't have a problem to defend themselves. I'm not here to defend them. I'm not a member of the TPLF. As a Tigran, what I know to be true is that my family members are not responsible for any type of genocide. They have never committed any genocide.
All right. I don't think the person asked their question correctly. I mean, the second person, but nobody is talking about family members or the people. The first question about the Tigrayan being in power for 27 years. Um, I mean, I don't know how old you are, but I know that you're not young, because you said there might be, I mean, I feel like you should be able to speak to that. If a government was in power for 27 years, from whatever you could remember personally, was the government fair? We're just trying to understand. Or did they
Mhm.
commit any crime at all? Or did they mistreat people that are not from the Tigrayan region? And we're not saying that it justifies the war happening. We're just trying to have better understanding, background information. So
Mhm.
instead of saying that an investigation could be opened, just from your own experience as a citizen, in the 27 years that the TPLF was in government, what was that like, especially for the whole country?
Yeah, so for the whole country, I don't know how many times I have to say this. TPLF has never, ever administered Tigray or Ethiopia single handedly. There was a coalition of political parties. There was a coalition of political party called EPRDF. That was the party that was in charge of Ethiopia for over 30 years, since 1991. It is this coalition political party that was administering Ethiopia. And TPLF was indeed a member of that coalition party. During that period of time, Ethiopia has seen very dramatic economic development. Ethiopia has become from a poster child for poverty into one of the booming economies in the world. It had become the diplomatic, political, and economic hub in Africa. But at the same time, there were issues around maladministration and democracy. But this kind of things cannot single handedly be blamed on TPLF. If we're to point fingers, we should all point fingers to the coalition political party that had administered Ethiopia together. When people come here and say TPLF was in power for 27 years, what they're doing in effect is that they are dehumanizing members of the TPLF, and they're dehumanizing the people of Tigray that are represented by TPLF during that period of time. So anyone interested in understanding what life looked like for ordinary Ethiopians during the period of um, the EPRDF's leadership should look into what all members of that political party had done to the people during that time.
I see. So you said it was a coalition, but just going through the comments, I do have a number of people that are saying that the coalition, that despite the coalition that you mentioned, that the TPLF was one that ran the country for 27 years. This one is from ABP, and there was also another one from to Niger that says, but TPLF was the major and leading group of parties. The president was from TPLF, because what you're saying is that it wasn't just the TPLF that was in
Um,
power at the time. So if you can
yeah,
just clarify based on what people are writing in the comment section.
sure. The president of Ethiopia has never been anyone from the TPLF or Tigray. The prime minister
I mean,
was
the
from
prime
the,
minister, sorry,
yeah.
I'm mixing it together. The
No,
prime
it's fine.
minister.
It's actually the
Yes,
person
that's what I
I'm
meant.
asking for. Yeah.
Okay.
So the prime minister, his may his soul rest in peace. His Excellency Prime Minister Meles Zenawi was indeed in power, and there were so many other presidents and so many other government officials that were working with him. For example, Abiy Ahmed himself was a member of the APRDF. He was a member of OPDO, which is a political fraction that was supposed to represent Oromos within that political coalition. So all of the people that you see today in power and are blaming TPLF in order to sanctify themselves, because what Abiy Ahmed did in effect is when he came to power, he had to find an enemy to point fingers at, to blame, so that he can justify everything else that he did following to that. So he came to power without any investigation, without any due process of legal due process. He blamed Tupele for every wrong thing that happened in Ethiopia. And the people bought this kind of political narrative. And that's why you see a lot of people today saying, oh, Tupele was in power for 27 years, while denying all the facts. The fact that Abiy Ahmed himself and so many other people that are parts of the Ethiopian regime today that is committing a genocide against the people of Tigray were in power. They were working hand in hand with the TPLF in their efforts to administer Ethiopia.
I see. Thank you so much for answering that. I'm going to move on. There were people that were still commenting about that, but I want us to move on. We've been at this for more than an hour. So someone wants me to ask you by the name Zev Laster about the Mycadra genocide.
Yeah. Mycadra is a place in Tigray. It's one of the towns in western parts of Tigray. Um, the invading forces from Amhara, a militant group called Fano, they raided Mycadra. Mind you, as I said, Mycadra is a town in western Tigray. It's a town where overwhelming Tigrans live. So this Fano militant group came, raided, killed Tigrans, gunned down them, raped them, massacred them, and then they fabricated the evidence and said they were Amhara people, and they said it was a massacre committed by Tigrayan people. How can a fellow Tigrayan kill and massacre its own people? And there are survivors of the Mycadra massacre that are currently in Sudan that were interviewed by international rights groups, by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, by journalists, and they detailed the harrowing incident that took place in Mycadra, whereby thousands and thousands of Tigrants were targeted by Fano militant group and were massacred in a broad daylight. So facts that people need to know is that Mycadra is a town in Tigray, and the residents were overwhelmingly Tigrants, and there was a massacre, and the people that were the receiving end of that massacre are in Tigrants. But the Ethiopian government used the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission that is working to justify and hide the crimes that are being committed against the people of Tigray, to fabricate a false information depicting that Mycadra was home to Amhara people, and as a result, the people who died there are indeed not Tigrans. So I wanted people to understand those facts so that they can formulate their own opinions. You're on mute. Sorry, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. There's like so many other comments about massacre that people wanted me to ask. But I think we'll move on because I need to round up. I don't know if you could hear my baby crying. This person is from Al Shady. How do the media affect the war in Tigray to the point still victims suffering like the okay, I'm not sure what I mean at the end, but I guess they wanted to talk about the media, the media's portrayal of what's
happening. That's a very important question, actually, because despite what people might think, have seen that they have heard and seen enough of the harrowing stories coming from Tigray, we believe that majority of the crimes that were committed are still in the dark. Um, sorry for your child. So the media, the international media, is not doing enough to expose the dirty tricks, the war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocidal actions that have been carried out by Ethiopia, Eritrea, and their local actors during this genocide. So we call upon all media outlets, particularly medias in Africa, to really to talk to victims of this genocidal war so that their audience could have access to unbiased information and they will be able to form their opinions. So, and at the same time, the media has been doing quite a very bad job in terms of respecting the wills and desires of the people of Tigray, starting from how they refer to our government, starting from how they refer to our defense forces. It's outrageous. You see them running with talking points from the Ethiopian government instead of really doing their due diligence, like research and understand what's happening beyond the levels of the talking points that they get from the Ethiopian government. So we're very disappointed, but we remain hopeful that fellow African journalists would actually have a genuine interest in learning what's happening and they would be professional enough to do their job properly.
I'm gonna ask one last question. Sorry, I really need to attend to her. Okay. And this question is from Angel Martin. How do you justify the call for independence in Tigray in 2022 versus 1991 when the TPLF had all the power to do so after a 15-year war and famine? By the way, when you explain the genocide thing, just so you know, a lot of people disagree with your explanation. But being that I'm not from Ethiopia, is it's hard. But some people are saying that there should be independent studies that will clarify what actually happened in Ethiopia, in Tigray. But I'm not going to dwell on that. This will be my last question for the day. How do you justify the call for independence in Tigray in 2022 versus 1981 when the TPLF had all the power to do so after a 15-year war and famine?
First of all, if the people of Tigray want to have an independent country, it's up to them. There is no any actor that has legal and democratic right to say otherwise. Nonetheless, the political parties in Tigray, the military, no one is calling for an independence. we don't have the luxury of talking an independence or remaining in Ethiopia when our family members do not have anything to eat and survive the coming 2 or 3 days. What we're talking about is an issue that is posing an imminent threat to the livelihood and to the well-being of Tigrans at the moment. So what we're talking about is access to humanitarian aid, for our land to be left alone, for the Tigrans that are languishing in different concentration camps across the country to be free, for our rights to exist as human beings to be respected. That's what we're calling for. But if Tigrans want an independent country, it's not up to the Ethiopian government, it's not up to the international community to say otherwise. But that is something that we will see once peace and security of Tigrans is restored to normalcy, and people have the right to conduct referendum, and after that they can decide. After all, we have we have been faced with inhuman level of brutality and cruelty, not only from the Ethiopian state, but from our fellow Ethiopians, from people that I thought were my friends, from people that we went to school with, from people that we admired so much growing up. We saw them justifying the suffering and the killing of our family members. So if me as a Tigran don't want to remain as an Ethiopian after receiving all these inhuman things, it shouldn't be surprising. But as I said earlier, no one is advocating for independence. What we're advocating for right now is for our survival as human beings and for us to have our democratic right self administration to be respected.
What are the conditions that you believe that Tigrayans want the Ethiopian government to meet for this war to be over?
Pardon?
What are the conditions that you
Mhm.
think that the Tigrayan forces want the Ethiopian government to meet for this war to be over?
Um, as I said earlier, these are not preconditions, but steps that need to be taken in order to find peace. Is the first of all, the Ethiopian government should lift the siege on Tigray. People should have the right to access money they had in banks. People should have the right to have access to humanitarian aid. So there has to be unfettered and unrestricted humanitarian corridor to Tigray. All invading forces, including the Amhara, the Fano, the Ethiopian, and Eritreans, need to leave parts of Tigray. They have to respect the territorial integrity of Tigray.
That's like ending the war. Like I do understand that that's like
Yeah.
ending the war. But according to you, you said that there were things that happened that led to the war. So besides leaving your territory, letting things work, what about those issues that you mentioned prior to when the war started? What is it that the people of Tigray want besides the government of Ethiopia leaving their territory? What do
Mhm.
you want?
Ultimately, we want our agency to be respected. We want to have our right self-determination to be respected. That's at the core of all of this, is that the Ethiopian government trying to decide the fate of our people. The Ethiopian government trying to decide what Tigray should look like. We are capable and empowered enough to decide on our future and
So
our
you
fate.
don't want the Ethiopian government. You want to govern yourself. Is this what you're saying?
Yeah, we want to have our the right self-governance.
But I asked you earlier, do you want to be your own country? You said no,
Um,
because I'm just
um,
confused. So you want to govern yourself, you don't want any interference. Like you don't want to have a federal government telling you what to do. You want to govern yourself, but you don't want to be your own country. Is this what is this?
So what federalism means is that federalism doesn't mean you give up your power. Federalism is a shared of power between federal and regional states. That's what federalism means. But what the Ethiopian government wants, what Abiy Ahmed regime wants, is that they don't want to have federalism. They want to have a unitary system whereby regions wouldn't have any type of say or right, whereby a single person would control the entire country without having to consult representatives of the different nations and nationalities. That's what unitary system means. Under federalism, both the federal and the regional
Was
governments work
that
hand in hand.
was that how it was when the TPLF and the coalition was in power, or that only changed when Abiy Ahmed took over power?
So prior to Abiy coming to power, we did have a federalism, just like how we have federalism in the US, right? You do have like states, they have their own power, and you'd have the
Yeah, I
president.
know, but I'm saying when the TPLF and the coalition was in power, was the TPLF, was the Tigrayans governing themselves, or they were going along with the TPLF and coalition government. So was the Tigrayans governing themselves in that 27 years or not? Or is it only when Abiy Ahmed came into power that the TPLF were not allowed to govern
But
themselves?
there was shared power when the coalition government was in power, and when EPRDF was in power. Tigrans were represented by the PLF, Oromos were represented by OPDO, Amharas were represented by their own political party. So all of these political parties were governing Ethiopia together, and there are certain rights that can only be dictated by regions. So there are powers that are unique to regions, there are powers that are unique to the federal government. So it was a shared power between the federal government and the
I
region.
understand that.
Yeah.
So I understand that. But what I'm
Hmm.
saying is, you said you want the Tigrayans want to govern themselves, regardless of federal government or
No,
not.
no, no, that's not what I'm. I think you need to read up on what federalism and unitary
I
state
do
means.
know what federalism
Then,
is.
if you do know, if you
So,
like, if you
well,
understand
you had
political
said
setting.
earlier,
Hmm.
that some of the things that led to the war
Yeah.
needs to be addressed. And I
Yes.
asked you, what do you want? And you said you would like to be able to govern yourself. You
Yes.
said that. And I'm
Governance
saying
is
that,
very broad.
and my
Admiral.
question is whether it's broad, whether your statement is broad or not. My question is, when the TPLF and the coalition was the one in power for 27 years, did you have that liberty? Were you able to enjoy governing yourself regardless of having a federal government? Were you governing yourself as Tigrayans when the TPLF was in government and the
Hmm.
coalition?
Uh-huh.
Or so were you able to govern yourself at the time there was no interference? You were able to have a say in the decisions that affected your lives at the time? Did
Hmm.
all this change when Abiy Ahmed became the prime
Yes.
minister? That was my question.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So, when the coalition was in power, the people of Tigray had the right to elect their local government, and the Oromo people also had the right to elect their local government, the same way to Amhara, the Command, and the other nation and nationalities in Ethiopia. When Abiy came to power, he took away that right from us. So, we're saying we want our right of electing our local government. So, that's what he's trying to take.
Okay. Thank you
Mhm.
for clarifying that. Thank you so much for your time, Ms. Meza. Is there anything else that you would like to say before I round this up?
First of all, thank you so much for providing the opportunity, and I thank your audience for listening in today to learn more about what's happening to the people of Tigray and to find ways to support our efforts of bringing about an end to the state-sponsored genocide. I encourage everybody to go to Omna Tigray. It's a nonprofit organization that advocates for the rights and protection of the people of Tigray and other minority groups. So do go to our website, learn about what's happening, and be a voice for change, be a voice for stability and peace. As fellow Africans, we owe it to ourselves to stand by African citizens and not necessarily by powerful men that reside on power and continue to abuse their power and their efforts of, grabbing huge amount of power that benefits only them and people that agree with them. So I just ask fellow Africans to learn more. Please do your independent research and learn more about what's happening. Not from activists, not only from advocates, but also from credible institutions, media outlets, and that way you will be able to find ways that you can contribute. We do have a responsibility to protect one another and not governments or politicians.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and for your patience. Thank you to all the people that joined us today in watching this interview. I really appreciate. Most importantly, those who asked questions, whether they're from Ethiopia, whether they are not from Ethiopia. Like I said at the beginning of this, we're all trying to make sense of what is happening, but above all, we all just want this war to end. We all just want this war to end. We want people to have access to the Tigrayan region again, and would like to be able to hear from all sides of the table. I'm so glad that I was able to bring you on the show to, hear your side of the story. having brought Ms. Hamela as well. And I really appreciate your time and your patience in answering all the questions. So we'll continue to talk about Ethiopia until the war ends, even after the war ends. But more importantly, I personally look forward to visiting Ethiopia someday. Thank you so much once again, everybody that joined us. And thank you so much, Ms. Meaza. Have a wonderful day.